Hey guys, reading in Joshua, again today, made it up to 23, and something had really kind of stood out. Uh, Basically, it tells us here in 23 that Joshua is now getting old. He's already kind of dispersed up the land, and each one of the tribes is going their way, and everybody is living right, and everybody is living for the Lord. Um, but Joshua cautions them in verse 8 and tells them that they need to continue to cleave unto God and to do all that he has said. And he gives them a warning and tells them in verse 11, "Take good heed therefore unto yourselves that ye love the Lord your God." Um, and he goes on to say that if you don't, in verse 13, "Know for a certainty that the Lord your God will no more drive out any of these nations from before you, but they shall be snares and traps unto you, and scourges in your sides, and thorns in your eyes, until ye perish from off this good land which the Lord your God hath given you." And he goes on to kind of talk in that section, between verse 8 and verse 13, about how basically they're not to take these foreign people as wives, and they're not to allow their daughters to be taken as wives. And this is not a racial thing. This has got more to do with maybe if we put it in modern context, Christians marrying other Christians. And the reason for this is because God does not want them to get drawn away by marrying into another family, marrying into another culture, and then as a result they gradually begin to get drawn away from God. Because let's face it, our spouses have a powerful influence over us and how we worship, and this is why it's so important that we as Christians do marry other Christians, so that we're not forced to compromise and conform, so to speak, for the sake of peace. That's a very, very difficult thing to be a Christian in a marriage, with someone who is not. But the thing that really stood out to me was in verse 6. It says, "Be ye therefore courageous to keep all and to do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses." And the thing that kind of stood out to me was the fact that he tells them to be courageous to keep the law, to be courageous to do all the things that God has told them to do. And it began to kind of dawn on me that it requires faith and courage to be obedient to the Lord. And we can see that even now. It's not being obedient to God, being a servant of Christ is not something that goes without being noticed. And I say that in a negative context because typically it is negative when you do things like decide to not bake a cake for a wedding, or not participate in some sort of function that you feel compromises your beliefs, and as a result of that you do get noticed. But Joshua is telling them here to be courageous, to be obedient to God. And then he gives them a word of encouragement in verse 14. He says, "For you know in all your hearts and in all your souls that not one thing hath failed of all the good things which the Lord your God spake concerning you. All are come to pass unto you, and not one thing hath failed thereof." So he goes on and he encourages them, and he tells them that all the things that God has said would come to pass has come to pass. Not one thing has failed. So he gives them a word of warning, and then he gives them a word of admonition and tells them, look, we're not stepping forth blindly and just kind of hoping and wishing that God is going to come through for us. God has come through for us in each and every circumstance. But that that our obedience, our faith in obedience, will not go unnoticed, and God has promised to bless those who are obedient to Him, and you know, and then He tells them, look, He always has. He's always come through. So anyway, wanted to go ahead and point that out to you guys today. I hope you guys are get something from that. I would encourage you to read through. Well, I mean, read all the way up to chapter 23. There was some stuff in there, a lot of kind of family this and that. You could probably browse through some of that, but particularly in chapter 22 and in 23, you start to see that there's some things going on, and there was some encouraging stuff in there. So anyway, you guys check it out. God bless.